Welcome to what promises to be hopefully another interesting and insightful session in what has been a day of interesting and insightful sessions. So let me tell a little bit more about the esteemed panelists in here. Dr. Dhaval Shah, co-founder at Pharma. He's an MBBS from the Rajiv Gandhi Government Medical College. He did his MBA from XLRI and worked at McKinsey for a few years, and then really has been at Pharma, been at the forefront in terms of trying to solve for affordable, authentic healthcare solutions. He's most recently also been featured in the Fortune 40 on 40, so congratulations again on that. Rajkiran is the Senior Director and Head of IoT and Augmented Reality at PTC. He's now been there, helping companies start their digital transformation journey and really chart out overall their plans for an overall, post-COVID environment as well. He holds an MBA in Finance and IT from MDI Gurgaon and a BTech in Computer Science. The second unicorn now on the panel, Ajith is the Chief Operating Officer at Delivery. He's been associated with Delivery for almost a decade now, since 2013. Holds a bachelor's degree in engineering from NIT Surathkal, and then a PGDM from IIM Bangalore. Welcome to all three of the panelists here, and we'll get started with the session. And the first question, Dhaval, I'll start off with you. The theme of this is around disruption and how do we unlock value from manufacturing through to the consumer. And as Pharma itself has evolved from being an online pharmacy to begin with to now more of a health tech player across multiple different parts of the healthcare system, how has your own perspectives on the pharma value chain and the opportunities therein, how has that changed?
So very interesting. So I'll tell you how did we start. I think when we started, it was very simple. We said if education, if commerce, if news, everything can go online, why can't healthcare? And we said we will solve for healthcare. We were pretty naive. We said it's just about delivering medicines, tests, and consults. Like how difficult can it get? And that's where we started the entire ecosystem, wherein we thought that let's start by delivering healthcare solutions. Obviously, it was a honest mistake and a disaster. I think the biggest learning was 80% of it is pharma in terms of spending. And that's where the biggest disruption needed to happen. The supply chain was fragmented, multiple challenges. I think that's where we said, let's empower local retailers. Let's help them unlock the potential out there. In terms of just supply chain, the biggest or the highest margin in supply chain in any industry to the supply chain that is given is in pharma. The only industry in the country which does not have its own supply chain is pharma. And it was just surprising to see that the benefits were not being passed on to the customer because there was a cost which was there because of the inefficiencies of supply chain. I think that's what we started working upon. And that's where we just shifted gears to say, this is what we will start with. Then we'll move into our entire goal of healthcare and health tech. Now with ThyroCare and now with, multiple forays. I think the vision is now coming back to life, wherein we are saying, when a consumer starts their healthcare journey, you can, healthcare is like a sphere. You can enter anywhere and it's just the same. So you enter with a test, or you enter with a prescription, or you enter with a requirement to speak to a doctor. At the end of the day, your solution should be within that ecosystem. I think cross-functional or cross-pollination was not happening. This is what we want to do, wherein if a consumer is buying healthcare products or say diabetes medicines, we want the consumer to also check for a HbA1c test every single quarter.
Right.
That's how I think technology will play a role. That's where we step in, and that's what our goal is.
Excellent. No, that's great to hear. And taking off from that point on supply chain also that you mentioned, and Ajith, if I come to you, delivery really started off as solving the supply chain problems within India, and it's now since expanded into providing custom solutions for pharma as well. what are some of the areas that you've had to customize for pharma? Because it's also very specific in terms of its requirements.
Yeah, so in terms of pharma, what we have seen over the last 3-4 years, and more so, obviously, a lot of the supply chain optimization across more traditional industries has taken off post GST. And obviously, GST changed the entire paradigm in terms of not having to necessarily get 25 warehouses to supply your stockist or your distributors from, etc. I think the two major points that we have seen. One is obviously pharma is a very, very value dense sector. It's also extremely complex in terms of inventory, right? So when you have a combination of value density, complex inventory, expiry being a very, very critical point, I think the importance of using technology within the four walls of the warehouse has become extremely critical. Now, this was something which when you were running much smaller warehouses was probably not as important. But as you consolidate, the entire paradigm shifts to basically how do you manage inventory within the warehouse efficiently, right? Why this is critical in pharma is also because I spoke about value density. Now the value density, in a sense, if you look at the equation, high value into high complexity equal to high inventory cost. And the only way to basically optimize this is as you go for warehouse consolidation, how do you manage the inventory within your warehouse much better? How do you use data to figure out the trends on what is moving where, when, how, and literally be able to give inputs back to the manufacturing side of it to figure out how to optimize the production. So it's almost like it's the front end of manufacturing in a sense. So you have manufacturing which has to figure out what to manufacture, and then you have the supply chain which is giving those inputs back. So I think it's largely about that, and that's the difference we're seeing. Obviously, what that means for somebody like us is that from having discussions around what will be the per kg cost of transporting, from Delhi to Bombay or from Bombay to Ahmedabad, it has now actually moved to figuring out how much can I reduce your inventory, in comparison to your sales. So your inventory sales ratio has become the key metric around which a lot of our discussions now get to.
Excellent, excellent. And continuing with that theme, and Rajkiran, if I can come to you, there was a lot of conversation earlier on in the day also about starting to adopt digital in a big way within pharma. And pharma has typically been a laggard as compared to other industries in terms of adopting digital tools. What role do you see digital, IoT, AR really play within pharma, and especially in Indian pharma? What are some global learnings that you see being relevant to the Indian context?
Yeah. So pharma has been a laggard. Maybe they are a very cautious player, right? We've observed that not just in India, but also globally. That's one of the last sectors that wants to adopt technology. And we know the reasons for that. It's the regulatory burdens, it's the sensitivities around data, etc. Now, with the coming of the pandemic a couple of years ago and the stress that laid on the supply chain, there's been this ever-increasing need to spend on digital technologies for something that Ajith referred to as well, which is the manufacturing efficiency as well as the feedback loop from the field, from the supply chain. Because of that, we're seeing significant spend now. There's significantly higher number of conversations that are happening in that space. What IoT can really bring is end-to-end supply chain visibility, right? You can have real-time information coming into the central repository with which people can take faster decisions in quick time. And that itself improves the operational effectiveness overall. And then the inventory reduction happens significantly. And the whole chain is optimized entirely. Now, globally speaking, there's so many companies that have started off doing this, have implemented it to a great extent as well. There are companies that have mainline pharma companies that have decided to call all their suppliers together and prescribe a certain kind of prescription for technology adoption. So all that is happening. And I think India is also getting on board very soon, and we're seeing a significant ramp up.
Excellent. And it's refreshing to hear all of you talk about, disruptions and, optimization and removing inefficiencies in the existing system. That's absolutely kind of the way to just take it to another level of higher level of equilibrium. Dhaval, if I can come back to you, though, from a slightly different perspective. A lot of the conversation that we just had was around inefficiencies in the current value chain. Now, a large portion of the Indian population is also underserved from a healthcare perspective. There's challenges around access, there's challenges around affordability, infrastructure, and so on and so forth. Now, as digital tools become more mainstream, as digital really goes from India to Bharat, do you see tech disruptors also starting to play a very key role from a patient perspective, really increasing access, availability to healthcare that they erstwhile, didn't have? And how do you view the role of tech disruptors in that space?
So we keep getting asked, right? How do you ensure that a e-commerce player or a platform which does not have a physical store, how does it reach every single pin code in India? I think our answer is generally very standard, that we are actually not trying to create awareness for Pharmeasy as a brand. We are trying to create awareness for healthcare as a category.
Yeah.
The problem is there's a problem of complete awareness. You just step out of the 8-9 metros which contribute to almost 60-65% of the industry as of now, and the awareness of chronic conditions, awareness of solutions available is so minuscule even today that there's so much more that can be done. Even today, if you look at our, we cater to all 19,000 habitable zip codes, and we partner with Ajith and the likes on various zip codes. I think the biggest learning has been there is a inherent requirement in sectors and in geographies where you wouldn't even know they existed, and the very fact that the purchase power is there, there is an inherent push from manufacturers as well as from service providers to be present in that area. But just the logistical, operational cost or the fixed cost does not make sense.
Yep.
That's where our network of partner retailers is something that, it works out for everybody. So what we are trying to do first is trying to create awareness of healthcare solutions, which will eventually translate into our brand and our recognition beyond a point.
Got it. And Ajith, especially as you think about going deeper, right, into different geographies. Now, in general, the Indian pharma industry faces problems, as you were saying, around demand forecasting, inventories, expiries, and so on and so forth. How do you see really supply chain technologies, coming in a big way to actually make sure that some of these inefficiencies, some of these problems are relegated to the past and we, move forward from here?
Yeah, so I think the basic set of technologies that have come in over the last few years, at least, where players like us have come and brought in more modern ways of warehousing management, tracking systems which are sort of 100% visible on a basis where every single movement is tracked, right? I think these are really the basic foundations, right? I think beyond that, I think a lot of it actually boils down to players in the pharma industry actually collaborating with us, like for example Pharmeasy has, to be able to access and get to to markets which traditionally were much more harder to get to, and hence were accessed in very different ways, right?
Yeah.
They were accessed through multi-layers, in a sense, which obviously meant that the information just did not boil up in terms of where it was going. So I think it's largely about that. It's largely about using the information. It's about using the networks that have been created, and in a sense, I think pharma can benefit significantly from that. I mean, Dhaval just spoke about reaching 19,500 pin codes. Now, 19,500 pin code network was not built purely for pharma, but it's now available for pharma. right? And you could think of different ways of reaching these pin codes. You could think of reaching the retailer. You could think of reaching the medical representatives directly. You could even think of taking some of these things D2C. And obviously you have then, for the vast majority, you have the marketplace kind of networks that people like Pharmacy have created. So
Right.
I think it's a question of how do you tailor your usage of each of these networks. What is it that you want to achieve? If you want to achieve depth, you want to achieve more information, you want to delayer, I think that's the choice that the industry will have to take.
Yeah, and what's increasingly becoming clear is that there is a new level of sophistication to manage the complexity that is inherent in India, and a new level of sophistication using new digital tools, technologies, and so on. And Rajkiran, if I can come to you with that, because I know you had a perspective on that. These issues, while they are quite severe in India, maybe around, the supply chain issues, etc., they're not unique to India. There are other countries also which have, similar challenges. So as you've looked at technologies and use cases, what are some of the key takeaways that you have on the pain points and, how we can address them?
Right. So broadly, there are 4 areas in the supply chain between the pharma supplier and the patient, right? There is the production networks of theirs, which is internal and external. There's also the warehousing logistics provider. Then there is the wholesaler, the distributor. And then there is the doctors, the pharmacies, the hospitals, right? Now, ideally, with technology, you should be able to get a consolidated end-to-end view of the whole thing. The problem and the challenge that exists is that there's so many different players doing a little bit of technology in all of these 4 boxes, right? There's so many, they're all heterogeneous. They're using different kinds of technology, and they probably are, not integratable with each other. What can be brought up as good solutions is a solid backbone beneath that can take inputs from all of these different systems, integrate all of the players within the supply chain, and provide one consolidated 360-degree view of the entire picture, right? And that requires good technology investment. I can give you an example. There is a $5 billion company called Lonza in Switzerland, a long-time customer of ours. And what they did is call upon all of the different suppliers, took a consolidated view. So now the ownership of the entire project was also taken up by this mainline pharma company. Made sure that there is some kind of a prescription. Obviously, they couldn't do it to the T, but there's some kind of a prescription of the technology that needs to be adopted, that is needed to be adopted by each of these players in the chain. And then they've been able to get, some degree of supply chain visibility. And with that, inventory cost reductions were there. There were a lot of inefficiencies in the chain that were identified due to doing that. So what is required is a robust platform which can probably help to integrate with every system in this entire supply chain. And that's the ideal state. I mean, we're all striving towards that. India could be more complex, but it is kind of complex even in other more advanced countries. But we're all striving toward that ideal situation.
Great, thank you. Maybe from the sector and the supply chain, we changed the perspective a little bit to the consumer. And, Dhaval, you started off with that, which is that benefits were not being passed on to the consumer. That was one of the points that you made. And when actually online pharmacies more broadly, when that started as a business model in India, there was clearly the benefit of actually seeing higher availability than necessarily the neighborhood chemist. There was also an economic advantage that consumers saw. And clearly in terms of also greater range that they were, you were being able to provide. As health tech, online pharmacies, as kind of these different newer business models also evolve, do you see improving health outcomes? And I'm deliberately kind of taking a very, very difficult, outcome. Do you see improvement of health outcomes as an objective that some of these platforms should also aspire to?
No, I'm so glad that you asked this, right? See, I think in general, people tend to, see, if you look at any industry that has gone online, healthcare was the last. I mean, amongst the day-to-day industries that we deal with, right? Health tech, if you may call it, started online in 2016, came to mainstream in 2018. It's just been around 4 years.
Yeah.
3.5 to 4 years. Obviously, COVID acted as a big boost.
Catalyst.
If you see any category that has gone online, the penetration is still in single digits for a vertical in India, in spite of spending a decade. And that has been on the back of crazy marketing, crazy discounting, freebies, and generally we've seen horizontals thrive better in our country versus verticals like a e-pharmacy, etc., etc. I think the hook for e-pharmacy has never, it will never be, let me put it ahead, will never be discounts. Beyond the point, the consumer actually does not care. My healthcare purchase is capped at roughly, say, 30,000 rupees a year, which includes my tests, my consults, etc., etc. 65-70% of this is in metros.
Yeah.
Even if I land up saving 15% more for a consumer in these geographies, it amounts to some 4,000 rupees in a year.
Yeah.
It does not account for like a significant quantum for 90% of the people who are spending on 30,000 rupees.
Yeah.
Savings will never be a hook. The hook will always be improving healthcare outcomes, giving me everything at one single place. Wherein if I am diabetic, like I'm 33, tomorrow if I have diabetes, I don't know what to do. I mean, so yeah, I am a doctor, but I don't practice. So as it is, it's a bit of a bad spot that I'm in. But had I not been a doctor, I don't know what do I do, right? I mean, I can just go to a doctor, maybe consult with him. That consultation might last for 10 minutes. After that, there's nobody to handhold me.
Yeah.
I want regular medication. I want testing. I want a dietitian to call me. I want a change in my lifestyle because I am going through a crisis wherein I feel I am hooked on to some medication for life. The very fact that you have somebody to handhold, and we're not saying we are still there, it's work in progress, but I think that's the objective that we are all trying to get to. And once we're able to do that, you will see drastic changes in healthcare outcomes, right? If I'm able to improve a glycemic index of a diabetic patient by even 10%, I mean, I've done something much more than maybe saving 30% of what he spends on healthcare. So I think that's the outcome. There are different ways to get there. Maybe we take 5 years, maybe we take 10 years. Maybe it might just happen in 2 years. But yes, that's the overall objective. The discounting, the freebies that come along is just to tell people shouting at the top of the roof that we are there, right? I mean, because it's just impossible. Building a brand in India is crazy, and you know, we would just you know, we love the fact that people have built fantastic brands in the past, but I think that has happened over a few years. If you want to crunch it down in 4 or 5 years, there's no other way to do it but then maybe go out there.
Excellent, great, and excellent vision, you know, very inspiring vision, if I might add. If I now come to you, Ajith, and say that, you know, there's clearly an element of just improving the quality of diagnosis, improving the quality of treatment, adherence, and then, you know, getting to health outcomes. From a delivery perspective, where you're thinking about the distribution space, what are the kind of benefits that both pharma companies and as well as you know, consumers themselves can actually expect to see?
So I think if you look at it from different angles in terms of how you approach the consumer and how you approach the supply chain itself, I think there are different benefits there. So the most obvious one is the one that Dhaval referred to, which is that how do you make things accessible to consumers who otherwise will not have access to it? Something like chronic medication, it's possibly hard for a pharmacist in a village to stock all kinds of chronic medication, or all kinds of high value medication. So can you create a system where he can directly, you know, come to you on some kind of an app and it can be delivered overnight to him, right? So he has the consumer wants the medicine. How do you make such a supply chain work, right? Today you have the technology, and more importantly, the pipes have now been set, right? The way we look at delivery, for example, is that it's a giant pipe, right? Yeah. Now that pipe can be used to pump things into different parts of the economy. You can pump it into retailers, you can pump it directly to consumers, you can, you can pump it to your distributors for fast fulfillment, pretty much all of those. So I think one aspect of basically how you can take advantage of it is in this way, right? The other is basically the consumer is also evolving. Let me sort of, just to give you an example, and this is something that we have seen very starkly over the last couple of years post-COVID. I think pre-COVID to post-COVID, the one large difference we've seen on consumers is that there was a set of consumers who were simply not willing to experiment with online channels for anything, right? They just, and it was not a question of affordability, it was not a question of not being able to use the technology, but they just did not want to do it. That changed with COVID. So now you actually have senior citizens who are ordering online, who are comfortable with ordering online because they've done it through COVID, and at that time there was no choice, right? You have a whole bunch of people who've discovered, whose primary mode of discovery of products other than the brands that they know is actually online. And nutraceutical is a fantastic example of that. I don't think the number of nutraceutical brands that exist today would have actually existed without an online channel. It's demand which probably was highly latent or was created by this. Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's the second part of where I think the pharma sector can take advantage, right? Which is basically how do you create these, how do you create this kind of demand? Because there is a consumer out there who is willing to engage with you in a very different way from how you have traditionally seen pharma consumers engage, and there is a way to actually now fulfill the demands of that consumer. So I think that's how I would look at it. On the distribution side, I think it's pretty simple. I think the question is one of delayering. I think the first level of optimization has happened on the mother warehouse / forward fulfillment centers. I think the question, and this is something which I myself would be very curious to know from the pharma industry, right? We hear about this across the board now, that getting distributors is hard. Distribution as a business is no longer as attractive as it used to be. And this sentiment is heard across FMCG, across stuff like appliances, and possibly even in pharma. That I think is, if that's the direction that India is going in, then I think the pharma distribution supply chain will need to look at delayering over a period of time. And to be able to delayer, I think you need to fundamentally change how you approach the supply chain. The last bit is actually, and one of the things that is unique about the pharma industry is that it is one of the few industries in India which relies on a massive direct sales force, right? And that sales force is highly distributed, right? Now, can you be more connected with them? Can you work with them more directly? Today, they can anyway interact digitally with you. Can you also ensure that the physical delivery of products to them, etc., is done in such a manner where they know exactly when they will receive something, what do they have to do with it, how do they approach doctors? Can you go direct to doctors? Right? I think these are all questions that will get answered over a period of time. And I don't think there will be a 0-1 switch. I think, like most things in India, the old will continue while the new gets layered on, right? So I think that's how I would think about the distribution and the consumer.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Rajkiran, if I come to you now and really go to the other end of the chain. So we spoke a lot about consumers and what the value for the consumers. If you think about manufacturing efficiencies and operations improvement there, IOT, augmented reality, Industry 4.0, those are new technologies that have all become more mainstream. How do you see that playing into pharma?
Yeah. Very relevant question now. Fourth industrial revolution, we are in the midst of it. And I think it's the age of cyber physical systems. And across the supply chain, the maximum efficiencies are going to be coming from the factory, from the manufacturing shop floor, from the production facilities. That's where the inefficiencies are, with these large equipment not performing to the optimal level. And there is always room for improvement there. So industrial IoT is that aspect. So the manufacturing efficiency is one aspect, quality is another, asset reliability and maintenance is another, right? Now, these are where all of it can be improved. Now, I'll go into each of them in detail. On the manufacturing side, and at a basic minimum, the plant manager should be able to see a dashboard of the production performance and the KPIs. And he should be able to take informed decisions based on something he sees on that dashboard of how his processes are performing, right? Now, he needs to do that in a very sustainable way. So energy consumption, water usage optimization, et cetera, are extremely relevant there. Coming to the quality aspect, pharma is the industry where the quality leeway is the least, right? The range of rejection percentages are actually the least, where batches can be rejected if it's not meeting the right kind of areas. Now, that's where AI and ML come into play. Now, with the number of ingredients that go into a pharma formulation process and manufacturing process, you need to exactly be able to pinpoint what ingredient has defects in it and what are the factors because of which there needs to be rework done. So that is something that is extremely critical there, and we see a lot of pharmaceutical companies being able to get their payback from purely the quality aspects. Then the maintenance and reliability side, and a close cousin of the industrial IoT is the augmented reality area, which is the concept of being able to convert the digital back into the physical world and see data contextually. You've seen those wearable devices that people can wear, look at a machine and get the real-time statistics out of it. Now, when people use augmented reality, they actually learn faster and retain better, which means that if they are taught a process, which is a standard operating procedures, there's so many SOPs in the pharma world, or they are taught the maintenance procedures and how you should improve and maintain the assets that you have on the shop floor, they're able to do it much faster. It's much better than reading a paper manual, much better than sitting in a classroom and listening to a lecture, and therefore that improves efficiencies as well. What we did in the first part of the pandemic, wave one, is when Prime Minister of UK, Boris Johnson, called for what was called a ventilator challenge, which was to ramp up the production of ventilators. And he called the research agencies, the manufacturers, as well as the pharmaceutical companies into that. And Smiths Medical, Ford, BAE Systems, all of these came into the picture in the consortium. So we provided our augmented reality technology to be able to ramp up production significantly at that time. And really, this has been adopted even by companies like Pfizer to be able to reduce the errors and be able to do things faster as well. So, these two technologies are really complementary and can derive maximum efficiencies.
Got it. So far, we've really spoken about, commercial data, and we've spoken about operational data and how do we use commercial and operational data for improving business, generating more value. There's also an aspect, and especially in healthcare, around the clinical data itself and the medical records and the fragmentation of the medical records between multiple doctors, diagnostic labs, the patients, how the systems don't speak to each other, and so on. Dhaval, now Pharmeasy is actually present in multiple parts of that healthcare ecosystem. Is that also an area of disruption that you're looking at? How are you thinking about really integration of clinical data across all of these different silos of healthcare?
So there's this saying internally within our company as well that monetizing healthcare data is a myth. Nobody will actually be able to solve it. I think we've been speaking about healthcare data since like maybe 4 or 5 decades, but nobody's actually been able to do anything meaningful out of it. And I'll tell you the reasons for it. I don't think you can ever make money, and you should ever make money from healthcare data. It's just not possible, especially in an Indian context where 95% of pharmacy stores today don't even have a barcode. The details entered of patient don't actually match the name or number or the address of the consumer. It actually, there's no way that you can actually monetize any of it or make meaningful decisions based on that. I think what is interesting is what can you do to improve the efficiency at your end. So let's say, if you were to split this entire thing into, say, just, broadly 3 pieces, right? The patient. What can you do for the patient? If I am diabetic, I'm consuming your insulin, right? You tell me when should I consume it. I don't think that's advertising. I don't think that's breaching into my privacy. That's actually hand-holding me. That's a brand being present when I need it to be present. What's the most efficient time in the day that I should take it? Like, how does it work well? That's something that I want to learn as a patient. Adverse drug reactions, meal interactions. I think those are things that I would love to hear from manufacturers as a patient. And that only somebody who has access to end-to-end consumer data, which is, hey, the doctor wrote so-and-so, and the patient got so-and-so, and hence, there's a relevant TG. This is a funny incident that happened, right? We were actually discussing internally, what is the drop-off rate of a consumer?
Yeah.
You have 100 people who buy from a platform today. There is 100 minus X over some time. And we're like, why is the X so high? Anything non-zero for a chronic patient should be unacceptable. And then we looked at the retention of a pharma company. If I'm consuming insulin of a manufacturer, and then I do 100 minus X of that manufacturer, the X was so high as compared to our platform that we were like, we are doing fine, right? Because consumers do not, even today, consumers relate medicines and healthcare to the retail store and not to the manufacturer. Because obviously, for obvious reasons, you cannot reach out. But this is where people like us or integrated ecosystem can play in, wherein you say, hey, you are under the care of X manufacturer through so-and-so, so-and-so, so-and-so. This is the dosage that they generally recommend. This is the percentage of adverse reactions out of their products, et cetera, and that works beautifully. I think that's the way forward. That's what we feel. That's where stitching data together will help. Wherein if I say if the HbA1c level is so-and-so and you've been consuming insulin by so-and-so, generally your HbA1c should be in this range. Yeah. I think that's just beautiful. I mean, doctors, consumers, patients would just love it. That's how we plan to move forward in the direction. I don't think monetization is something that will ever work out.
Yeah. Yeah, and like you're saying, it's not necessarily about monetization, but this flows into your improving the health outcomes point that you were making earlier. One more question, Dhaval, to you, which is that, health tech is still in its infancy in India. There are challenges around, regulations. There are challenges around, it's still a large out-of-pocket market, et cetera. Other markets, the US is reimbursed. China has a different system. What are the different directions that you think it could take in India?
So I think the biggest problem in India even today, if you ask us as a consumer, I think why is healthcare not taken care of in general as an individual? If I'm a consumer, if I'm a patient, if I make my monthly budget of expenses, the last I would account for is unplanned healthcare expenses, right? That's something that just doesn't come to us naturally. And this is very counterintuitive in a market like India where 90% of OPD healthcare is out of pocket.
Yeah.
The 10% is just maybe governmental institutions or private corporate insurances that cover in parts of OPD care. I think that's bound to change. We feel that, so we currently partner with 100,000 pharmacy stores. One thing that we're realizing across is everybody wants to do more. Everybody wants to adopt tech, move closer to the consumer. Every retailer wants to do it, but the cost of doing it is something that a individual retailer cannot afford.
Yeah.
The direction in which we can do is as you said, healthcare outcomes which are directional in solving healthcare conditions, wherein I say, hey, you have this condition. These are the 3 important stakeholders: a lab, a store, and a doctor. These are the 3 stakeholders who will take care of it. You pay X amount a year, and it will be taken care of. Now, whether that money is paid through some insurance, or through your corporate, or through out-of-pocket, or some schemes, etc. That's something that we will all figure. But I think you will get very soon, you'll get into all of us trying to solve for conditions through an integrated approach versus me moving as a consumer from a lab to a store, to a doctor, to a hospital, and not finding a solution at any place maybe.
Great. No, that's a vision of an integrated system really working to the patient's benefit. So that's great to hear. Ajith, last word from you in terms of how you expect the distribution system in India to evolve from a pharma perspective. It's been, as you were saying, it's been fragmented. There are changes certainly happening. Not many people want to do distribution anymore. So how do you see that space?
I think, I think a couple of things are happening, right? One is basically the fact that access has changed. And that obviously means that there are many, many more ways of doing distribution than have existed. So I think more than the distribution system changing from what it is currently, I think what we'll start seeing is newer and newer layers of distribution, different channels emerge. And each of these will be relevant for certain kinds of products. They may not be relevant for all products, right? Does it really make sense for, for a very commonly used OTC drug to be sent in a single pack, 250 gram pack? Possibly not, because it's available 5 minutes or 10 minutes from your home. But does it make sense for a completely new distribution system for, for certain kinds of drugs? I think that certainly does, right? So I think what we will see is basically, depending on what the demand for a product is, how do you create that access for it? What should be the cost of distributing it? You will see different distribution systems emerge, right? And in a sense, I think that's really what this country needs. And it's no different in that sense from something like FMCG or fashion in that sense, right? Where different kinds of products are now being sold in different ways. So if you look at, for example, if you look at just how e-commerce has changed over a period of time, and Dhaval spoke about this very briefly in terms of the e-commerce consumer, how the e-commerce consumer behaves. In the last couple of years, D2C has become a much more prominent part of e-commerce. It's something which probably did not exist. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't have a large number of consumers who are coming into the horizontals, right?
Yeah.
That flow has not stemmed, but there is a consumer who's also, in a sense, maturing and is going beyond the horizontals and going D2C, right? So I think what you will see with the consumer and hence with distribution is that different consumers for different products will adopt different channels. The question, I think, for the industry and for supply chain players like us is, how do you create sort of very, very flexible systems? How do you create very flexible supply chains that can literally cater to all of these? One size fits all is possibly a thing of the past, if you would ask me about how distribution would play out.
Great. No, I think it's been interesting to capture the theme around how we are moving to much more segmented, much more kind of consumer-oriented solutions. We have time maybe for a couple of questions, so I'd throw it open to the audience. Any questions for the panelists here? If you could just give your name, who you want the question from, and the question itself. Sorry, yes, if somebody can get a mic to that, to near the end of the, please. Thank you. It's at the back.
Thank you so much, wonderful panel. In fact, I'm also into healthcare. So my question is to Ajith as well as to Dhaval. Both of them are leading this industry. How do you see basically tier 3, tier 4 and beyond towns evolving in terms of supply chain, deliveries, etc.?
Yeah, it was to you. It was how do you see the supply chain for tier 3, tier 4 towns? How do you see that supply chain evolving?
With friends like Ajith, I think we can reach everywhere. I don't think there was ever an issue of accessibility. It was always an issue of viability. I mean, beyond the point, if a tier 3, tier 4 town does not generate enough volumes, why would anybody go there? But with a model which is, say, central and a hub and spoke model, which almost every company these days operates on, and if you have the logistics partners who are super efficient in terms of cost, and even if you can generate basic demand, it's very easily doable. And that's what we do. Obviously, there are challenges in pharma, especially with cold chain management. But again, one thing at a time. So I think you can almost solve for 80-90% of the problem right away as of now. So and the demand has always been there. It's just about awareness and viability.
I think the challenge that both of you are saying is that we'll get the supply chain to work, we'll get the product there. It's more about how do I convert that need into an actual demand generation. And
in a viable way.
In a viable way.
Yeah, I mean, like, there have been instances wherein there are orders from Andaman and Nicobar Islands, right? And the cost of sending a shipment there is some 700 rupees. I mean, it's just not viable unless the ticket size is such or there's enough density. So that's the challenge. But I think over time, we'll all be able to overcome that.
So supply chain is not going to be the constraint to the growth of the sector. It's more about demand generation at the front end. Great. Any other questions? Great. I think we are sorted then. Thank you very much, Dhaval, Rajkiran, Ajith. Thank you very much for answering all the questions and for an insightful session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.